So hello, everybody on Facebook and YouTube this evening. I am so grateful that you have chosen to join us for this uniquely interesting episode of Voices of WIA. For those of you who are new, Voices of WIA is brought to you by Women in Apologetics, a group of Jesus-following women who want to encourage, educate, and equip you to defend your faith with confidence. So every month we interview a woman apologist from across various fields of knowledge to bring you new and fresh insights that you can use to keep your faith anchored in the truth during what has become an increasingly faithless age. So before we get started tonight, jump on in the chat with your name and just let us know you're here. We will be having a book giveaway in a few minutes. And to be eligible, you just need to show up in the chat. So give us a wave or a hello, and you're completely good to go. We are a team of about 40 women, mostly volunteers. And as we look toward the end of the year, we want you to know that we have big plans to help you defend your faith, including our Apologetics magazine and adding some more short courses to our WIA Academy lineup. Plus, we have really cool things in store for our key partners this year. So with Giving Tuesday right around the corner, your gift of any amount will help us reach our goal of serving you well, or better yet, become a key partner and join our Apologetics collective. Now, back to our episode tonight, we are taking a look at what might be required of you if you want to start some kind of an apologetics class or apologetics training in your own home church. You may find that you have some specific obstacles to overcome, and you'll probably need to have some strategies in place to help you get started. And so I know that you'll want to hear our guest tonight and everything that she has to say, because she knows exactly what that is like. She was very instrumental in getting her church to start an apologetics program, which now is alive and growing. And so she will share with us some of the things that she has learned along the way. If you and I haven't met yet, my name is Lori, and I'm the host here at Voices of WIA. And I am so grateful that you are here with us tonight, because you are the reason that we do what we do. Our guest tonight became a Christian as a really young girl, even though it meant attending church all by herself. She was active in our youth group in high school, and she went to a Christian college where she was exposed to apologetics instruction and eventually became an advocate for it in her own home church, which now has a thriving and growing apologetics ministry. So here to tell us about everything that she learned, please welcome Julissa Mena. Hi, Julissa.
Hi.
I am so glad that you're here with us tonight. How are you doing this evening?
I'm great. I'm a little nervous and people might notice, but otherwise I'm great. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a treat to have you here. I think this is a great topic. In fact, I was just thinking before the show, I don't think we've talked about this before. I think this may be our first time to have this particular issue. And I think it's so great because I'm sure you know, apologetics is so important for our young people and our parents especially, and churches are beginning to add it to their program roster, but not many people know to think to ask or how to bring it up or request one or how to get one started. So this is going to be very timely and very helpful, I think. So thank you.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Okay, so just to get us started, please tell us kind of what is going on in your church now. How is your apologetics ministry doing? If we were just to pop in last minute, just to take a look around, what would we see in terms of, the interest levels, the attendance that you're getting? Where are you now? What kind of things are going on now? How's it going?
So I would say that at the moment, we have a fair amount of support at our church when it comes to our apologetics ministry. And that might not seem like a big deal for a lot of people, but actually being able to say that today is a huge deal, especially because in the beginning we had little to no support. And I think that most of it had to do with the ignorance of like, why is this even important? Why does it even matter? But now we are we are actually doing an annual conference called Apologetics Bible Conference. And we call it ABC because the initials are ABC. And this year was our 6th year doing it. I believe it was our fifth or sixth year. And it is a completely bilingual conference. Our church is Hispanic, so we find it necessary to have topics in both languages. But that alone is a huge accomplishment, and our kids are very engaged in it. We have more parents joining us and seeing the need for apologetics. And we just have a lot of people being exposed to it from other churches, from our network of churches as well, which is also great. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, I love that you call it ABC. What did you say it was? Apologetics Bible Conference?
That's right.
I love that. That's so great. That's perfect for students. I love that. Okay. So are you guys doing anything interesting or new right now or recently? Is there something specific that you're doing that you'd like to share with us?
So something new this year, we've always, ever since apologetics was approved to teach our teenagers, I'm in charge of ages 12 to 15. We've always taught them some sort of topics on apologetics. However, this year is the very first year that we were approved to do a full-blown apologetics curriculum, both on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which is when we meet with our kids. And on Tuesdays, we have a How to Study the Bible curriculum by the one that Elizabeth Urbanowicz created, and also her other one, which is for critical thinking, careful thinking. And our kids are a little older than what she recommends those curriculums for, but because we're a little behind on where our kids should be expected to be as far as apologetics at their age, we're okay with it, and they're growing and they're loving it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Almost everybody that I know that's started apologetics, it doesn't take them very long to fall in love with it. It's really, I can imagine the kids especially, it's even faster. Did you mention how many students are in your ministry right now?
So we have an average attendance of, so we have about 20 teenagers in our church, but the active ones it's an average of 8 to 15. We have more on Tuesdays because Tuesdays is our Bible teaching for the whole church. So the parents go as well.
Sure.
So that kind of just kills two birds with one stone. So they bring their kids along. But on Thursdays, that becomes a little more difficult because the parents do have to go out of their way to take them. But we do have an average attendance of 8 to 15.
Okay. Did it start out that size, or has it grown to that point?
To be honest, there was a lot of games and fun before. So I want to say the attendance was larger because the interest was in the focus was in the fun.
Yeah.
And so since we swapped that to the important stuff, if you want to put it that way, the attendance has been a little bit less, but the productivity is so much higher. So there was lots of fun, lots of attendance, but there was no productivity. The kids were not growing. They were not learning. However, now that is not the case. And we have very knowledgeable teenagers, the ones at least that are interested. You always have the kids that are there, but not really. But at least for the ones that are interested, you will ask them questions. And the other day we had a teacher come who was impressed and said that some of the things he learned in the first year of seminary. So we were very grateful to hear that compliment because our kids are between 12 and 15.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, that even if you did see a drop off in numbers necessarily, that I was going to ask whether or not that was compensated for by an increase in commitment by the ones who show up regularly. And you kind of answered my question. That's what it seems like.
Absolutely. And I think that our church is learning slowly but surely that quantity is not priority, but quality. So the quality of the follower of Christ that we are discipling is more important than the quantity of people we have of attendance. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
it totally does.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you very first got started, what did you do to launch this ministry? Because I can imagine, all of us who've grown up in church. We've all been around through the Sunday school
Yeah.
curriculum, and there are certain things we have lots of background experience with, but apologetics is not one of those things for most of us and for most churches. So, how did you even get it off the ground?
So that was a challenge. I go to a Pentecostal church and I also go to a Hispanic church. And um, there are a lot of things are taboo and not discussed, at least back then. Now, thankfully, we're expanding a little bit as far as what we're willing to talk about and all those things. But in the beginning, it was very difficult to have them see why it was important. So the first thing I did was prepare a presentation that was relatable,
Yeah,
where they could see why apologetics was important and what the future looked like if we didn't incorporate it into our curriculum. And I gave them numbers, statistics. I made it relatable in the sense that they could understand what that exactly meant. And I didn't just say, 30% of our kids are going to leave church. No, I said we have this many students and this many are going to leave if we don't do something about it. And I made specific numbers so that they could understand how important and how scary it
yeah,
was if we didn't make a change soon. And I also made sure to include the leaders in making this decision and not going over their head, which I think is very important when you're trying to make changes in church, because
absolutely.
you don't want to go behind their backs
No.
and do any of these
No,
things.
yeah, you definitely have to get your leadership on board, even if it means having, lots of these kinds of conversations. Because like we said, most people have never been a part of an apologetics program before. They don't really
Yes.
know. I think it's very difficult for people to recognize kind of what the fruit will be. They don't really understand what the purpose is for apologetics. And so I think you have to just slow down, especially for me. I'm talking to myself here because I'm so enthusiastic about it. I have to stop and pause long enough to help somebody understand what is going on with an apologetics ministry. So sometimes that just takes a lot of conversations. You have to do a lot of backpedaling and explaining some things because it's just something that most churches don't do. So absolutely, you definitely want to get your leadership on board and invest the time that is necessary to teach them what they need to know, and also to create those relationships so that there's a whole lot of trust, because they are responsible for their flock. So they have to
Right.
know that everything that you're teaching and that your heart is good and that your teaching is sound and all that kind of stuff. And that just takes time to work through.
And I'm very headstrong. Once I get really excited about something, I want to get it done and now. And so one thing I had to learn was patience. A
Yeah.
lot of patience. We also, being a bilingual, well, a Hispanic church, we do everything in Spanish, and having to convince the church that our teenagers needed to be taught in English because it just became unnecessary almost to teach them in Spanish because they didn't understand me. So that was actually a huge hurdle at first,
Yeah.
that cultural wanting to just really hold on to the culture, which I don't think is bad. It's a good
Oh,
thing
of
to
course
be
not.
familiar with your culture, but I just think that some things are more important. And as I told them back then, if it was that important for them to know Spanish, then we could have involved the parents in telling them
Yeah.
about it, but not making us responsible for it. So being a culture that is very that also sometimes we tend to, as a church, make the culture or the tradition a priority instead. I think that can happen anywhere.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
And sometimes we have to really examine what is the most important thing here. Do I want my kid to hold on to their roots, or do I want them to grow in the Bible? And of course, the best scenario would be both, grow with their roots and learn the
Yeah.
Bible. But if you choose one or the other, which one are you going to choose?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Okay. So now that you've been there and done that, what would you do differently? Is there anything that you've thought about since then that you would do differently if you had the opportunity to start over knowing what you know now?
Yes. There is one thing that I wish I would have known from the very beginning that I came to realize, I want to say maybe 2, 3 years into getting through this challenge. And one of the things that I think would have been very helpful was to realize what I was asking our leadership to do. And I think that what I was asking them to do was something that is even hard for anyone, no matter what, how simple it is. And it's to admit that what we were doing is not working. So to have to admit that what you have been doing for so many years was not working is very difficult to admit. And they might not have said it verbally, but essentially that's what I was asking of them, to admit that, hey, what you've been doing has not been working, so we need to change it. And I think that's a hard pill to swallow for anyone. And that when someone told me that, I think I became much more sympathetic, and just was able to relate more, especially because it's difficult for me to accept, man, I've been doing this wrong for so many years.
Yeah.
Especially when I was confronted with apologetics and truth, there were some things was very difficult for me to let go of, because I've been growing up with them since I was very little, and to say no, I've been doing it wrong all of these years, and how much time I invested in that was just a very difficult thing
Sure.
to admit, and heartbreaking, because I'm a person that when I love something, I invest a lot of time in it. So to know that all that time I invested was doing it wrong, I just really was more able to put myself in their shoes,
Sure.
seeing it from that perspective.
Sure. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I think about that all the time. Every time I look at the numbers and the graphs and all the reports that talk about the kids leaving and the youth groups, and whether the programs are working or aren't working. And I think, that's got to be a big impediment for all of us, because most churches get involved in some kind of a program or some kind of a habit. And then to have to
Right.
say it is not working, we've got to do something different. Well, then it's not quite so easy as, swapping out a YouTube video. Oh, I'm done with this one, I'll watch a different one. It's not quite that easy. So there's so much that has to be done as far as training, and there's so much that has to be reconceptualized. Well, what does it mean to disciple kids today? What is that? What do we have to do differently that we haven't been doing? And if they're coming at it from no experience in apologetics, it really is a little bit, I'm sure and most of us who have studied apologetics, it's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. There's just so much there.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is. And so the amount of resources, you don't know sometimes where to start.
Yes, that's
There's
true.
so
Very
much.
true.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point. Okay, so what are there any other lessons? Is there like really big light bulb moments, or some kind of lessons that you've learned in the process of these last 5 or 6 years, that you could kind of share with us as far as making that transition painless and effective for your church?
I think that one of the things that, again, aside from patience, which is very hard for me. So, mind you, I love seeing results, but I don't want to wait very long to see them. And I think that with God, I just really had to learn that He uses that specific thing to help me grow patience, because He knows how much I want to see results. And so He makes me wait it out. And one of the things that I think is important is to realize that even if you are having setbacks in the big picture of making or trying to make changes, realize that the people that are close to you are people you can impact as well. And realize that if you impact those people, you don't know where those people are going to go and who they're going to impact.
Sure.
And one of the things that I had to learn, was that relationships are so important, when it comes to wanting to be effective in the kingdom of the Lord. So cherish those relationships. And when you learn about apologetics, share with them what you've learned, because you never know where those fruits are going to go.
Yeah.
And I know, at least from personal experience, friends that I've had have been able to influence people that I could never connect with, because I'm either in different circles or we're different ages. but they were able to, because I shared what I knew, and they were impacted by the little bit I knew. And you just never know the difference you can make in your little circle. Don't be so concerned with going big. Let the Lord take care of that. You do your part, but just wherever you are, make a little impact where you are.
Yeah, that's a really good word, actually. Just being worried about the impact that you're making where you are, because I think it's really easy to think, if I don't see some big reaction, if I don't see some big thing happening, that maybe nothing's happening. When the reality is, the ripple effects, they may be subtle, but they're wide, and we may not see the end result. So that's a really good word.
Absolutely,
Actually.
yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, it is time for our book giveaway, and you guys are going to love this. I'm sure you've probably heard of this author. If you haven't, you're going to get so excited. It's such a neat book and such a neat guy and such a neat story. So tonight's book, this particular book is going to be really helpful for this specific task to anyone who's just getting started in apologetics, or somebody who wants to help someone else come alongside them and help them get started in apologetics, whether that's a youth group or a small group or a church ministry. It's authored by a guy named Jim Warner Wallace, who worked for years as an LAPD cold case homicide detective, who started out as an atheist, but became a Christian after studying the New Testament Gospels as if they were eyewitness documents to a cold case, which they are in a very unique and New Testament sort of way. I think this is the third of 4 books that he has written, and it's called Forensic Faith, and it is fabulous for getting started in learning apologetics. And so tonight's book winner is Tanya Leva Gutierrez from Facebook. So Tanya, if you will hop into the chat and just say hello to our moderators, they will help you get the information that you need to get that book in your hands. And congratulations, this is going to be a really, really down-to-earth, really enjoyable, practical resource for you and for whoever else you want to teach apologetics to. So congratulations, it's a really great book, really enjoyable, and you'll like it a lot. It'll be really effective. It'll be really helpful for you. Okay, so like we were saying, churches can be very resistant to an apologetics ministry, which is always kind of a mystery to me, but it's true. It happens a lot. And so, Julissa, if you were giving someone advice on how to get started approaching their leadership with a request to start some kind of apologetics training in their church, what would you tell them to do first?
Well, my suggestion would be talk to your leaders about what you want to do. I would even say just tell them that you have something important to share with them that you think will be very helpful. Prepare a presentation, make it real to them. So just talking is not going to be as effective as actually showing them visuals of what the future looks like if we don't start making changes. And I think that you need to make the numbers real for them. Like I said before, you have to include all of your leaders that the church requires that you include, because you want to make sure that at no point does anyone have an excuse to say that you were going over their heads or being disrespectful to the leadership at any point. You want to be as respectful as possible, and you have to make sure you're patient, because the temptation to go over their heads might be there, because I'm going to do it anyway, but don't be patient, pray, look for support wherever you can find it, and make sure that you have read enough to answer the basic questions they might be asking. Foresee the questions they might have and include the answers in your presentation. I think that's also key.
Yeah.
Because if you can foresee the questions they're going to have, you can avoid having to wait to get the answers and then bring it to them later and save some time.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Okay, so speaking of results, now we get to the really, really good stuff. What kind of results has your apologetics ministry seen? What are you seeing happen in your church?
So one of the things that we did, that I did when we started all of this, was I had the kids write what they thought about Jesus or what they thought about the Bible in a piece of paper. And I read them to the church. And it was a little scary because I don't think they were expecting to hear what they heard, which was something along the lines of, I think the Bible is a myth. I think Jesus was just another person, things along those lines that were scary. So then forward to a few years later, I did the same thing again, and the answers are very different, thankfully now. So our kids are understanding why Christianity matters in a practical way, even in the basic things of life. And they're becoming much better thinkers. They're better at asking questions. They're not believing whatever everyone says. Again, I said I have those kids who really don't really care and are not paying attention much. Or at least it seems like, because sometimes that's not the case. But you do have those kids that they're being attentive, they're writing notes down. And when you have conversations with them, now the conversations look a little different because they're asking better questions and they're using their minds, which is what we want. Elizabeth Urbanowicz emphasizes in her lessons that we're so focused on loving God with our heart, with loving our God with everything else but our mind, which is part of that Bible verse. And the way we think matters to God because we are supposed to honor him in the things that we think as well. And a lot of times we ignore that part and we are okay with thinking all the wrong things, all the wrong ideas, believing lies because we think that it's going to be okay if we do, but it's not, because we are supposed to honor and glorify God even with our minds, and what we believe matters. And the kids are slowly starting to see how important it is to think critically. And they're also learning to study the Bible on their own. And we have teenagers in our group from 12 to 15 who read the Bible all on their own, even if their parents don't read it. And they're doing it on their own. And it's incredible to see how well they are applying the skills. So the results are going to be there. Maybe it'll take some time because obviously you have to start from zero and up. But it is so worth to see that one kid who ends up getting baptized. I just witnessed some of my kids get baptized 2 Fridays ago because of everything they've learned and realized that the necessity of Jesus Christ in our lives because of who we are and the reality of Christianity. So it's been evident and in small scales and small amounts, but so worth watching.
And by the way, that idea that you had to have the kids write down what they thought of Jesus and then read that to the church, that is gold. I mean, because everybody assumes that we talk about Jesus every week. We love Jesus. We sing songs to Jesus. We pray to Jesus. Surely everybody has the right ideas about who Jesus is. And that's really interesting that you did that, and very insightful that you did that. And by the way, audience members, we're going to have an opportunity to ask Julissa questions. So if you have any questions that you would like to have answered, please just throw them in the chat, and our moderators will get them to us so that we can discuss your questions during this episode. But yeah, that was really smart, Julissa, to do that, because I don't think most people would have thought to do that. And I don't think most people would have thought that there would be a problem, that, their youth group, their kids know, at least as far as they know. It's kind of an eye opener when you see that the kids that you're teaching week after week after week have really absorbed some incorrect ideas. And that's really helpful. Definitely. Okay. So you've mentioned it a couple times, but what kind of curriculum are you using at the moment? And tell us all about that. And then did you start out with that curriculum, or is it, I'm sure after 6 years, you've done a couple. So if
we've done quite a few. We've used a lot of the Sean McDowell material, especially on Right Now Media. We have that is geared toward apologetics. We definitely addressed a lot of the Bible verses that have been applied wrong, with the wrong context, and just used a lot of the I forgot the name of the curriculum at the moment. Oh my gosh. It was by J. Warner Wallace. It was a book, actually. It wasn't like a whole-blown curriculum. It was a book. And then we also I used one, my very first one that I use is called Why Do I Believe why do I believe this? Something like that. And it was Gwendolyn. She's not very well known. It was but she wrote it for her kids.
Oh,
And she ended up publishing it because of how many people wanted to read it. And I can't remember specifically the name, but it's something along the lines of why do we believe what we believe? And it's her first name was Gwendolyn. I remember that much. I actually have it, but I can't remember the name.
okay.
But that was my very first one when I was exposed to it. And it was so simple, such basic things that you could teach a kid with her book, and it was very helpful. And we did some of the answers in Genesis material in the very beginning, especially the ones that were focused on creation. We also did some. In 6 years, we did so many. I'm trying to remember some of the other ones.
Well,
We also.
it sounds like there are plenty of resources available, actually, which I think most people aren't aware of. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree. And the difficulty with our church was that they wanted to see material that was in both languages,
Oh, okay.
to get them on board. So, but thankfully, we were able to, I at least offered to translate any material if necessary, if it became a point where there was a teenager who did not speak English and only spoke Spanish. So we did that if necessary. However, 90% of the time, 9 out of 10 times, we had mostly English speakers. So it was mostly never a concern.
Yeah.
We had maybe a handful of times that I had to translate. So actually, once we were able to convince them that we didn't have to have everything in both languages, the world opened up.
Yeah.
And so there's plenty out there.
Sure.
Definitely.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm glad we had an opportunity to throw that into the discussion, because there really are a lot of resources. In fact, somebody who's getting started in apologetics can almost kind of drown in, all the things that are available. And so it's really helpful to know, first of all, that there's plenty there. And that way, if they're looking for something, they don't have to feel like they're going to have to work hard at it, because there really is some really good things out there. In fact, I don't know if you've read it, or I don't know if your church has done it, but Jim Wallace, the same guy who did our book giveaway, and Sean McDowell, who is an apologist at Biola, they wrote a book together, so the next generation will know. Are you familiar with that?
So one of the things I did is open a little club of women who read virtually. We would get together, virtually read. That's one of the books we read.
Oh,
and that in our group, they were able to read that book. We all read that together. So it was great. And some of those were parents of the teenagers that go to class.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, by the way, for those of you who are watching, our website, Women in Apologetics, we do keep a list of recommended reading resources. So that might be a place for you to get started, just kind of looking up some authors and some titles and some topics that you might be interested in for yourself or your kids or your church or whatever. So that's an opportunity for you there as well. Okay, so now that we've talked about how you got started, and that there were some, a few hurdles you had to jump along the way in getting it started, and then you had 5 or 6 years of different kinds of curriculum, and some growth in your students, and seeing some results in your students, and seeing the commitment level of your students. What do you foresee happening in the future at this point? Do you and your church have any particular plans for the apologetics ministry? Are there ways that you want to grow or stretch, or what are you guys kind of thinking at this point now that you've been doing it for a few years?
So I'm excited for the future, because some of the kids that I started off with are now adults and are getting married, and hopefully will have children soon. And so I'm excited to what they as adults will do with what they've learned. And it makes me a little emotional, because these are kids that I started off with years and years ago, and now they're getting married. And I realize they're adults, and they're going to be part of the church, and they're going to be serving, and they will also will impact others with what they learned. And that is something that I look forward to seeing.
Yeah.
A lot of them are already doing it in their own ministry, like wherever they're serving, they're already doing it, and they are seeing challenges, and they are seeing the hurdles, but they are being so brave and pushing through and being faithful. And that alone again makes me emotional, because it just the power that apologetics has had through the Holy Spirit to make them so convinced, and
Yes.
just conviction they have for the gospel, that they're willing to give up and do and cry and do whatever they need to do to be able to stand up for the truth. And that alone, to watch 1, 2, or 3 of my kids do, and to see how in the future they're going to have children and be able to raise those children, and on top of that, having plans for the future of doing camps and retreats with our kids that focus on these different things, and helping them just become strong Christians and not have to worry about losing them when they go to college or become adults, and just realizing that you know what, Christianity is the only thing that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Just out of curiosity, has your church leadership seen the difference that's happened in the kids? Have they said anything about what they see happening since you got started?
We have people who acknowledge it.
Good. That's good.
We do have people who are constantly being grateful, especially in the parents group. We do have people who are in the leadership. There are some of the parents of these kids, and they are very grateful for everything that we do to help these kids and strengthen their faith and help them be better followers of Christ.
Yeah.
And I think that for the most part, we are able to, at least those who have been closely impacted by the changes, meaning the parents, they're able to see a huge difference in their children and who they are as a person, period. Because that is what the Holy Spirit does. It just impacts who we are as a person. And they have been able to see that in their children. And those who don't see it are encouraged, especially by me, to continue bringing their children, because at the end of the day, they are going to be responsible and accountable before God for what they did with their children. So I can definitely say that I'm grateful for the acknowledgement that people at least realize and verbally do it, because I think that sometimes pride can get in the way and we don't want to say it, even though we see it. But at least from the parents who are involved in the leadership, we definitely have received those moments where they acknowledge how much of a difference it has made in their own lives and in the lives of their children.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's great. And hearing it from the parents, I mean, that's kind of like a double whammy for to see the differences that's happening in the lives of kids. And then to hear the parents say, oh my gosh, I see my child growing. I see them being able to defend their faith. I see what effect it's having on them. That's really, really outstanding. By the way, apparently one of our viewers tonight was a student in your apologetics ministry at some point in the past. Now is 24 years old and has hopped on to watch. So still hanging around. You've had that much influence. Still hanging around. I love that. Okay, we did get a question from the audience. She wants to know what is the biblical reason for why you deem it's important to teach apologetics in the church? And I bet I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to let you say it.
I think that one of the reasons we shut down apologetics is because the word apologetics is not in the Bible. But the reason we do it is because Paul says we are supposed to be ready to answer all, the questions with grace, with love, with gentleness, but I'm sorry, Peter, actually, and it's Peter, and it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be ready. And if I ask the members of our church, are you ready? And the answer is no, that means we're not doing something that the Bible is telling us we're supposed to do. And well, that's a command, and that would be called disobedience. So it's very simple, I think. If we don't care and don't prepare ourselves, we are being disobedient. And I think that that's harsh. And sometimes it's ugly because people don't want to accept that apologetics is very important, and they want to be okay with not being able to answer questions.
Yeah, I
And
think for a really long time, especially here in the US, we haven't felt a need for apologetics because Christianity was sort of accepted. And so, it used to be in the early church, apologetics was just a natural part of what the church did together. And by the way, the verse, if any of you are wondering what the reference is, it's 1 Peter 3:15. So I think the church did it naturally early on, out of necessity, because they were attacked, in the early years. And so we've just been lucky enough that we have not had to have that kind of persecution. And I think we've just fallen out of the habit of teaching ourselves these things, of making this a priority. And also too, you've probably heard people say this in your own church. I know that I have, when I talk about it, just, with people, whether it's in my church or just in my neighborhood, that a lot of people assume that there's something about knowing the answers to the questions that is contradictory to faith, that somehow is opposing the idea of faith, that you shouldn't have reasons and you shouldn't have evidence and you shouldn't have to have that kind of an approach. And I think that's just a misunderstanding of what the word faith means.
Yes.
So anyhow, I think that's part of what's kind of contributing to people wondering why apologetics is necessary, and kind of facing a whole lot of inertia in starting that kind of thing. So,
I mean, I had people in my church just a year ago say that apologetics is a secular thing, basically. It's almost like dismissed, like, it's not like, even to me, I'm like, apologetics is right up there with theology. You can't have one without the other. But theology is like, and then apologetics is like, so it's like, no, you need both. I absolutely agree. Theology is absolutely important. Sound theology is absolutely important, but apologetics is right there with it. And if you're going to have to grab a whiteout and take out 1 Peter 3:15 if you don't like apologetics, and then you would have to accept that you're basically erasing that from the Bible, and that's not okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think most people, and like I said, most people, once they start learning it and reading it and kind of understanding what it can do for them, oh my gosh, they fall in love with it. So it doesn't take much to get started. It just having to help people understand that there really is, first of all, a practical need. And secondly, like you pointed out, a biblical need. There's a biblical need to follow up with apologetics too. Okay, so we have another question. This is a great question. I'm anxious to hear your response to this. What types of challenges or questions are most relevant or engaging to your students? What kinds of things really cause them to respond?
Definitely the topic of anything that has to do with LGBTQ topic. That is a huge. I have my quietest students participating when that topic is brought up, because they have all sorts of exposure to that at school. So you can imagine how many questions they must have. Something as basic as, can I talk to them? You would think that it's something obvious, but even that question is asked, and you have a lot of kids questioning, is it okay? And you have to explain to them, I like to ask questions so that they come up with the answers. Greg Koukos' strategy and tactics to, like, just, if you're doing most of the talking, you're doing it wrong, right? Ask questions, and they usually come up with the answers on their own if you're asking them questions. But definitely anything around that, anything around depression, suicide, these topics, they're really tough topics, and they're just so engaged in these topics when it comes to and I believe it has to do with the exposure of these topics in social media, in school, with friends, experiencing some of these things. And unfortunately, in the Hispanic community, first of all, these things are taboo in the Hispanic community, period, if you are Christian or not. And then on top of that, if you are a Pentecostal Christian in a Hispanic community, some of these things are just dismissed and ignored. And thankfully, we are able to talk to them and help them see through a biblical perspective how we are supposed to look at these issues from a biblical worldview. So our kids are naturally going to be influenced by their parents, but once they start seeing what the Bible has to say about it, then they have to make a decision between, do I want my view? Do I take my friend's view, my parents' view, or do I want the Bible's view? Which one matters more? And I think it's they're challenging to them, but also it takes a lot of courage if they do take it on and say,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to let the Bible transform what ideas I have about this topic.
I had never, I don't hear a whole lot of apologists speaking on, like depression, anxiety, and suicide. So that's interesting to know that that's something your kids have shown interested in. So that's a really good thought, as far as trying to actually meet them where they are and get them engaged and that sort of thing. We do have at least one more question, and it's a little bit of a recap of what we talked about in the beginning of the show, but I'll go ahead and ask you anyway. What challenges did you have convincing your church leadership to adopt apologetics, and how did you overcome their concerns? And you might want to throw in, just a little a blurb, a reminder of kind of your suggestions that you told us earlier about how if one of us was starting fresh with our leadership, what kinds of things do we need to keep in mind?
So yeah, aside from what I have said between realizing that you're asking your leaders to admit that they've done it wrong all these years.
Or maybe they may not be doing anything explicitly wrong. They're just that the approach that the church is taking, culture has taken.
The wrong decisions have been.
Yeah, culture has shifted us in a completely different direction than any of us are familiar with. Right. And it's taken a long time sometimes for our churches to kind of catch up and figure out what it is that we need to do to address that. And so, that's at least that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, culturally, we've brought kind of the secular stuff into the church and kind of want to adapt the church to the secular things. And I think that a lot of that is because it's been allowed. And instead of fighting back like, no, this is not okay, we're just like, okay, fine. We're just going to do it to make people happy. So I think that a lot of those decisions were made with good intentions, right. But at the end of the day, there were no good results. Sure. In the sense that what we want is not to make people happy. We want people to be followers of Christ.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned it. I think you mentioned something earlier that's really important in this. We got the idea that if we made church fun enough and exciting enough and light enough, that it would sort of overcome some people's hesitance to come to church, or it would overcome their objections, or it would make them feel more comfortable. And I think we've actually just learned a really hard lesson the really hard way, is that there's, truth is what it is. And the reality that we live in a theistic world, that has limitations. There are certain things that are true and certain things that are false. And that's never easy when you're coming to that realization from some other position. And you have to recognize that, some of the things that you've been taught or some of the things that you've assumed are false. There's no real way ultimately to make that palatable, because none of us like to be corrected. None of us like finding out that we're wrong. That's just human nature. And so there's only so much that we can do to make that kind of a tension go away. There's only so much that you can do. There's just always going to be that basic level discomfort in being instructed and being corrected, and the church just has to learn to do that wisely, gently, but wisely as well.
And I think that there's this we're overly concerned with quantity, and one thing that we have to understand as a church, as leaders, and as just the body of Christ, is that yes, God does want people to be saved, but he also wants his church, those who are already saved, to believe what is true and to think correctly about the Bible, about the truth, about Jesus, about God, about himself, about everything. And so we are it just becomes worrisome when we're too concerned about quantity and we're not doing anything to make sure that we're making quality out of these new believers and that they're becoming effective followers
Yeah,
of Christ.
especially right
And so,
now.
especially right now, we're so concerned with filling up our churches, we're forgetting those who have been there all along.
Yeah.
And they need to be fed and need to grow, and they need to learn to know the truth. And it's just one of those things that you as a person have to be convinced that that is true if you're going to fight for this.
Yeah, sure.
If you are like about truth and it's not that important to you, don't even dive into this, because you're going to quit it. You're going to quit real fast.
Well,
you have to be yourself convinced about how important truth is.
Yeah, definitely. We have a couple more questions, but I do want to make a shameless plug really quick. One of the things that that we women can really, we can really make a bigger difference than we realize, is that because we all have a natural bent toward our children, toward the concern for our children, is that we can, there's a big need for women to study apologetics, because we are a direct line to the next generation. And so any of you out there who are listening and you're a mom, or you work in your youth group, or you have a small group at church, a ladies' small group, especially if they have kids too, one of the best ways that we can roll up our sleeves and do real kingdom work just in our little everyday environment, church environment, is to have some kind of a book study, an apologetic book study or something. And just within the moms and the friends, our peers that we disciple with every day, the ones we do life with every day, just starting at that level. It doesn't have to be this full-on youth ministry curriculum. It can start really small with wherever you are in your church. And so if that's you, Women in Apologetics website has a lot of resources, and we would love to come alongside you and help you. That's why we exist, is to help you find the resources and the confidence and the courage to kind of get the ball rolling wherever you are. And so I thought I would just throw that in there. Also, we have a couple of really good questions. One of them was, if I'm going to get started with an apologetics ministry in my church, who do I go to? Do I go to the youth minister? Do I go to the children's minister? Do I go all the way to the executive pastor? Where do I start? That's a really good question.
It is a very good question. And I think it matters how your church is structured.
Sure.
I don't know, it just depends on how the church is structured. If you have someone who is in charge of the curriculums of your church, go to them first. And then they will advise you where to go next, and so on. Respect the hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
So you want to be respectful of the hierarchy. If your church doesn't have a specific structure, specific hierarchy, I would go straight to the leaders and just ask, hey, I have this concern. Who do I go to? Do I go to you?
Yeah.
And ask the question. So I think that respect the hierarchy if you're informed, if the church is obvious enough about what that looks like. And if you don't know, ask. It doesn't hurt to ask your leaders or ask your pastor, who should I go to about this?
Sure. And I think something that we talked about earlier too, relationships matter. So go to whoever you have the best relationship with, and then just say, I don't know where to start. Can you point me in the right direction? That's probably as good an option as anything else, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And we have one more question. Do you find that it is best to start with a specific age group?
Well, my experience has been mostly with 12 to 15-year-olds. So I could only speak from that perspective. I'm not sure what it's asking as far as to do what. I imagine to teach apologetics.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry.
Well, if it's to teach apologetics, how soon can they speak? That's really, honestly, I'm not even joking about that. Like, my children are being exposed to this stuff now, and they're 4 and 5. Well, she just turned 6. Never mind, 4 and 6. But it's apologetics is kind of like theology. You can't avoid it. We just choose to avoid it and to be ignorant about it. But it's everywhere. I mean, it's practical for everyday life. So you can start with any age group. If you have the choice to do it from the time they're tiny, do it from the time they're tiny.
Yeah.
Which one's easier? Well, it just depends how much they know. If they grew up with apologetics, guess what? It's going to be an easy conversation to have with them throughout. if they were never exposed to it, it's going to be hard no matter what age you start exposing them to, because you're asking someone to start from zero at a given specific age, especially if they're adults.
Yeah.
So be patient. I don't think it's meant to be easy. You know, that is why one of the things Paul says, we are supposed to tolerate each other, because some people don't grow at the same speed. And that's okay. We are supposed to help them. But if you have the choice, and if you can make that choice, start when they can start speaking.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, like when they start saying "mom,"
I love this conversation, and we've had more questions tonight, I think, than we've had in a really long time. So I'm just tickled that people have showed up and are so interested. This is such a good topic of conversation, and I just want to say thank you. You've had so much to contribute, and we obviously struck a nerve, because it seems like there was a lot of questions coming up, and so that's so exciting to me that people are waking up. So thank you so much for being a part of that and for sharing your story. And by the way, congratulations to you for growing that ministry and starting that ministry, because that is such a good work, very good kingdom work. So good for you for doing that.
I'm just grateful that God decided to use me. He could have used anyone, and I'm grateful that my husband and both of us, he used both of us. And
absolutely.
I'm grateful.
That is so great. Well, thank you, Julissa, for coming on tonight and
thank you.
Taking time out of your evening and sharing all that. I really appreciate that. And so do all the WIA team members. So thank you so much. That was great, wasn't it? Okay, so if you were at all blessed tonight with all the discussion and that we had, please, we would appreciate it if you would support us by subscribing to our channel and following us on social media, or donating to our ministry. There's a QR code right there that you can scan to be a part of our Apologetics Collective, which is our monthly members. Did you know that it takes $70 to produce one of these episodes and $25 to do a single social media post? So we're not talking big numbers, but it can make a big impact. So if you'd be willing to support our ministry, it would be so we would love it so much. We'd be so excited to be able to take apologetics to whomever else down the road, whoever's coming in the future. You can even become a monthly donor, which allows us the ability to plan ahead. Not to mention, we have really big plans for our group of monthly donors, which is our Apologetics Collective. So please come and join us. And also, in case you're interested, we have a conference, and registration for our conference next year is opening up soon on December 1st. We would love to have you at our annual Women in Apologetics conference. I think you'll love the speakers. I know you'll love the vibe and the WIA tribe. There's such a great group of women. So save the date on that. And check out our webpage also to look at all the speakers lineups and all that information for our conference, because we would love to have you there. And I think I can say that the conferences so far that I've been to, the response has just been overwhelming. So I hope you'd consider come to our conference as well. Our next episode next month will be with Hillary Morgan Ferrer of Mama Bear Apologetics. And I know you don't want to miss that episode. So make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and here on YouTube so you don't miss a thing. So thank you so much for being here. And until next time, it was wonderful having you here, and we'll see you at the next episode. Goodbye for now, but I look forward to the next time. See you later.